Picture this. It is a quiet Tuesday morning, and the sunlight is streaming through your home office window, just like it always does. You have your coffee sitting on the desk next to your laptop, and you are mentally preparing for the usual 10 o'clock sync with your team. You are thinking about the emails you need to answer and the project deadlines looming by the end of the week. But when the video call connects, there is an unfamiliar face from human resources sitting silently next to your manager. The entire conversation lasts less than 4 minutes. They use sterile corporate words like restructuring and redundancy and severance. They tell you how much the company appreciates your past contributions, but their voices just sound like a low static buzz in your ears. You nod politely because you don't know what else to do, and you watch their mouths move, without really absorbing the devastation of what they're saying. And then the call ends. The screen goes completely black, and you slowly reach out to close your laptop lid. The sudden silence in your room feels incredibly heavy and entirely unnatural. It is a suffocating quiet that physically presses against your chest and makes it hard to take a full, deep breath. The world outside your window is carrying on perfectly normal, but your personal universe has just violently collapsed. For a long time, you just sit there frozen in your chair, staring at the closed computer. Your brain hasn't quite processed the massive reality of what just happened. You are completely paralyzed by the sudden shift in your daily existence. Just 1 hour ago, you were mildly annoyed about a slow internet connection, but now you're genuinely terrified about your fundamental survival. Then the terrifying internal monologue fires up. It starts as a quiet whisper of doubt and rapidly escalates into a screaming siren of panic inside your head. You instantly start doing the chaotic mental math that every single person does in this exact traumatic moment. You immediately think about the massive rent payment that is scheduled to be automatically pulled on the first day of the month. You start agonizing over the electricity bill, the car insurance premium, and the suddenly terrifying cost of simply buying basic groceries for the next 2 weeks. With shaking hands, you pick up your phone and open your mobile banking app. You stare blankly at the checking account balance, glowing on the screen. Just yesterday, that exact same number felt completely fine and secure because you knew another direct deposit was landing on Friday. But today that number looks dangerously small and incredibly fragile. It's no longer a healthy, flowing river of money that is constantly being refilled by your bi-weekly salary. It has suddenly become a stagnant, shrinking pond, and every single automated bill is a massive pipe that is going to relentlessly drain it dry. You realize, with a cold, sickening wave of dread, that your income has completely stopped, but the relentless machinery of your monthly expenses is going to keep hitting you. Your mind frantically starts racing through desperate disaster scenarios. You wonder exactly how long this finite pile of money will actually last if you immediately cut out every single enjoyable thing in your life. You think about frantically selling your belongings or taking massive penalties to break into your retirement accounts just to keep the lights on. The financial anxiety transforms from a vague worry into a dense physical weight sitting heavily in your stomach. The hardest part about this exact moment isn't simply the loss of your professional identity. It is the sudden and violent psychological transition from living a normal, comfortable life to instantly entering a strict, brutal survival mode. You feel exactly like a captain on a deep-sea submarine that has just permanently lost all of its engines. You're trapped deep underwater, and you are suddenly hyper-aware of exactly how much breathable oxygen you have left in the tanks. Every single unnecessary movement and every tiny financial expense feels like you are wasting precious life-saving air. You are utterly terrified to even spend $3 because you have absolutely no idea when the income machine is going to turn back on. You sit completely alone in the quiet, empty room, feeling profoundly isolated and desperately wondering how you're going to stretch this rapidly shrinking pile of cash until you can finally find a way to breathe again. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. That suffocating feeling of suddenly losing your income is one of the most universally terrifying experiences in the modern world. It is a quiet, invisible trauma that millions of people go through every single year. You are sitting there entirely paralyzed and wondering how a single 4-minute conversation could completely dismantle the life you spent years carefully building. The sheer mental exhaustion of having your fundamental survival tied to a bi-weekly direct deposit is something we rarely talk about until the deposit actually stops. We live our lives pretending that our jobs are permanent fixtures like gravity or the sunrise. We sign year-long leases and we take out Massive auto loans based on the fragile assumption that our current income is a guaranteed reality. So when that reality shatters, it isn't just a professional setback, it is a violent eviction from the illusion of safety. Your brain is suddenly violently thrown out of the comfortable wealth accumulation phase and slammed directly into strict, brutal survival mode. That sudden gear shift is exactly why you feel so incredibly paralyzed. Yesterday, you were casually debating whether to buy a nice pair of shoes or save up for a weekend trip. Today you are standing in the middle of a grocery store, desperately doing mental calculus over the price difference between name brand pasta and the generic box. It is humiliating and it is terrifying, and your brain genuinely doesn't know how to process the emotional whiplash. Biologically speaking, your body is treating this financial crisis exactly like a physical threat. Your system is completely flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. You are functionally operating in a state of chronic trauma, and that makes rational, long-term financial planning almost entirely impossible. When a tiger is chasing you, your brain doesn't let you sit down and draft a beautifully color-coded budget spreadsheet. It just screams at you to run. And the most exhausting part is that you have to pretend everything is perfectly fine. You have to smile at your family and tell your partner that everything is going to be okay and project total confidence to the outside world. But internally, you are running on an endless hamster wheel of absolute doom scenarios. You are lying awake at 3 in the morning, calculating precisely how many days you have left before the utility company shuts off the power to your house. Here's what most people don't realize about this exact moment. We are constantly taught how to hustle and how to negotiate our salaries and how to climb the corporate ladder to make more money. But we are absolutely never taught how to systematically slow down the bleeding when the money suddenly stops flowing. We are completely unequipped to manage the sheer velocity of modern financial life when our primary engine entirely fails. The world around you does not care that your income just evaporated. The modern financial ecosystem is completely indifferent to your sudden panic. The massive corporations that hold your mortgage and your car loan and your phone contract do not have empathy built into their software algorithms. Their automated billing cycles just keep spinning and spinning, perfectly designed to relentlessly extract cash from your accounts exactly on schedule. You are deeply convinced that you are failing right now because you lack the discipline to stop spending. You feel intense shame every time you accidentally buy a coffee out of habit or pay for a streaming service you forgot to cancel. You blame your own lack of willpower for the fact that your bank account is draining so incredibly fast. But the truth is much darker and much more structural than your own personal discipline. You are not struggling because you are weak. You are struggling because your entire personal financial infrastructure was exclusively built for a beautiful sunny day. You set up your entire life on a foundation that requires constant perpetual motion and massive amounts of incoming cash to keep functioning. You built a fast, expensive race car, but you never bothered to install any structural shock absorbers for when the road suddenly turns into gravel. This is the hidden reality of sudden income loss. The problem isn't your willpower or your ability to quietly suffer through the pain. The problem is that your financial ecosystem is deeply rigged against stillness. We have built our daily lives entirely around automated extraction and frictionless convenience. And when your income violently stops, that beautiful, frictionless convenience suddenly becomes a fatal flaw that will drain you completely dry unless you fundamentally rebuild the system. Let's look at the actual numbers. According to recent financial studies, nearly 70% of Americans are completely unable to handle a sudden $1,000 emergency without going into debt. But the data gets significantly darker. When you look at what actually happens during a prolonged period of unemployment, the average American household is currently bleeding over $270 every single month in forgotten subscriptions and automated digital payments. That is over $3,000 a year, quietly slipping out the back door while you are desperately trying to guard the front. This is not a mistake. It is not an accident of the modern world. The entire global economy has spent the last 2 decades deliberately engineering a financial system that operates entirely on invisible friction-free extraction. Corporations figured out a long time ago that if they force you to physically hand over a $20 bill every month, you will eventually stop paying. The pain of parting with physical cash is deeply wired into our human psychology. So they simply removed the pain. They completely eliminated the physical exchange of money. Instead, they convinced us to link our credit cards and bank accounts directly to their servers. They sold it to us as a beautiful lifestyle upgrade called convenience. You never have to worry about missing a due date again. You never have to manually enter your credit card number again. You just set it and forget it. When you have a healthy, steady income flowing into your bank account every 2 weeks, this frictionless convenience feels amazing. You barely even notice the $10 here, or a music app, or the $15 there for a premium software service. It all just blends into the background noise of a busy, successful life. But the absolute second your income permanently stops, this exact same system becomes a terrifying parasitic weapon. Financial institutions have quietly reported that people who experience sudden job loss often continue paying for entirely unnecessary automated services for an average of 3 to 6 months. Let that sink in for a moment. In the exact traumatizing window of time, when people are desperately terrified about paying for basic survival, they are still blindly funding corporate gym memberships they haven't used in a year. This happens because the system relies heavily on your emotional paralysis. When you lose your job, you are heavily overwhelmed by the massive big picture threats. You are desperately updating your resume and stressing out over your massive rent payment. Because your brain is completely occupied by the giant, terrifying bears in the room, you entirely ignore the thousands of tiny mosquitoes that are quietly draining your blood. Think about how incredibly brutal that mathematical reality is. When you are at your absolute most vulnerable, the automated digital world does not show you an ounce of grace. Your bank does not automatically pause your recurring payments just because your corporate direct deposit suddenly failed to arrive this Friday. The algorithms do not care that you are currently staring blankly at your kitchen table trying to hold back tears. In fact, the banking system is perfectly designed to aggressively punish you for this exact vulnerability. If an automated subscription for a streaming network attempts to pull $15 from an empty checking account, your bank will not gently decline the charge. They will gladly force the payment through and then immediately slap you with a massive $35 overdraft penalty. They will literally charge you money simply for the crime of not having any money. This is what I call the vulnerability tax. It is the hidden premium you pay simply because your brain is too exhausted by the trauma of unemployment to actively fight off the automated leeches we are constantly told by financial experts to rely on: our emergency funds when disaster strikes. But an emergency fund is utterly useless if there is a massive invisible hole drilled into the bottom of the bucket. You are fighting a multi-billion-dollar machine that is heavily incentivized to make sure you never actually stop spending, even when you have completely stopped earning. The corporations employ armies of behavioral psychologists to design billing systems that are incredibly easy to join and wonderfully frustrating to cancel. They hide the cancel buttons deep inside impossible menus because they know your exhausted brain will simply give up. To survive this critical period, you have to wake up and see this digital ecosystem for what it actually is. It is not your friend, and it is a convenience. It is a highly efficient extraction machine. Recognizing this cold mathematical truth is the first mandatory step to taking your power back. You have to stop blaming your lack of willpower for falling into the trap and start actively defending your life against a system designed to strip you bare. Here's what most people don't realize. The way you act when your money suddenly stops isn't a reflection of your character. It is a highly predictable biological response to an environment of extreme scarcity. Behavioral psychologists have spent decades studying what happens to the human brain when a critical resource is suddenly taken away. Whether that resource is food, or water, or cash, the biological reaction is exactly the same. Your brain essentially goes into a state of cognitive lockdown. The researchers call this the scarcity mindset. It is a psychological condition where the lack of something absolutely dominates your entire mental bandwidth. Imagine your brain is a computer and you only have a certain amount of processing power available for the day. When you suddenly lose your job, the panic of survival opens up 50 invisible browser tabs in the background of your mind. Those tabs are constantly running and draining your battery, leaving you with almost zero processing power to make actual rational choices. This creates a brutal irony. At the exact moment in your life When you desperately need your brain to be at its absolute sharpest to plot a new course and manage your remaining cash, your brain actively betrays you. You develop extreme tunnel vision. You become entirely fixated on the immediate threats right in front of you, and you become completely blind to the long-term strategies that could actually save you. You start heavily obsessing over clipping a 50-cent coupon, while totally ignoring the fact that your auto insurance is quietly pulling $200 a month. This massive drain on your mental bandwidth quickly leads to something called decision fatigue. When you had a steady paycheck, you didn't have to think about buying a basic gallon of milk or grabbing a cheap sandwich for lunch. Your brain just automatically processed the transaction and moved on. But now every single dollar you spend requires an intense, agonizing internal debate. Should I buy this now? Or should I wait until next week? What if I need this $3 later for an absolute emergency? By simply living through an average morning of these tiny agonizing choices, your brain is completely exhausted by noon. You have spent so much mental energy just trying to survive a trip to the pharmacy that you physically cannot handle. Looking at your overall budget, this intense decision fatigue is exactly what causes the most dangerous psychological trap of sudden unemployment. You begin to aggressively engage in avoidance behaviors. You know exactly what this looks like. You stop opening the envelopes that come in the mail. You deliberately silence the email notifications from your bank. You absolutely refuse to open your mobile banking app to check your current balance. You tell yourself that you will deal with it tomorrow when you are feeling a bit more rested. But tomorrow comes, and the anxiety is still there. So you push it off again and again, while the automated bills keep quietly eating away your cash. You aren't avoiding your bank account because you are lazy or irresponsible. You are avoiding it because looking at that shrinking number triggers a genuine physical pain response in your body. Every time you open that app, it is a fresh reminder of your trauma and a massive spike of stress hormones. Your brain naturally wants to protect you from pain, so it actively convinces you that ignorance is safer than facing the terrifying math. But this avoidance creates a deeply fatal feedback loop. The less you look at your money, the more anxious you feel about the unknown. And the more anxious you feel, the harder it becomes to actually log in and look. You become a passenger in your own life, quietly hoping that things will just magically work out, while the digital algorithms systematically drain your remaining lifeline. You are paralyzed in the dark. In the world of global economics, trust is not an emotional state. It is a structural necessity, and when your income violently stops, you completely lose trust in your own reality. You can no longer trust that the future will look like the past. Without that structural trust, your personal economy completely collapses into chaos. You cannot rebuild that trust by simply trying harder, to be disciplined, or hoping the anxiety goes away. You cannot willpower your way out of a biological response. You cannot negotiate with a brain that is actively drowning in cortisol and survival panic. If you want to stop the bleeding and actually stretch your remaining cash, you have to entirely bypass your own psychology. You need to build a cold mechanical system that protects you from your own exhausted mind. You need a physical barrier between your panic and your money. This is where you implement the first phase of the financial triage system. I call this specific mechanism the hard pause. You have to understand that your current financial ecosystem was built for maximum speed and zero friction. When you have money flowing in, you want everything to be seamless. But when the money stops flowing, that exact same speed becomes your biggest enemy. You have to intentionally throw a massive wrench into the gears of your own life. You have to build physical walls that make it annoying and frustrating to spend even a single dollar. The very first action you need to take does not require budgeting or profound self-discipline. It requires logging into your primary checking account and hitting a single button. You are going to digitally lock or freeze your primary debit card and your primary credit card. Every major banking app has a feature that allows you to temporarily disable the card with a simple toggle switch. You are not canceling the cards entirely, you are just putting them in a state of suspended animation. Instantly, your world changes. By simply flipping that one digital switch, you have successfully severed the primary artery, connecting your vulnerable bank account to the outside digital world. The next time you are lying in bed at 2 a.m, scrolling through an online store, trying to buy something to briefly numb your anxiety, the transaction will fail. The beautiful seamless double click on your phone will result in a harsh, Red error message. You have built an immediate physical barrier between your emotional impulse and your actual money. But you have to go deeper than just the physical cards. You need to aggressively dismantle the invisible digital infrastructure that makes spending money effortless. You need to open the settings on your phone and completely delete Apple Pay or Google Pay. You need to go into the settings of your internet browser and delete all of your saved autofill credit card numbers. You must destroy the beautiful convenience that the tech companies spent billions of dollars engineering, specifically for you. When you delete these saved payment methods, you are effectively forcing yourself back into the financial Stone Age. The next time you actually need to buy something online, you are going to have to physically stand up, walk across the room, find your wallet, pull out the plastic card, and manually type in all 16 digits, the expiration date, and the security code. In the modern world, having to manually type a credit card number feels like an agonizing chore. And that is exactly the point. That agonizing chore is the friction you desperately need to survive this period of unemployment. By forcing yourself to go through a slow manual physical process, you give your brain crucial seconds to catch up to your emotions. When you are typing out those 16 numbers, you are suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that you are spending real finite money. You break the hypnotic spell of frictionless digital convenience and force yourself into a state of brutal reality. Now, you might be worried about the important automated bills, like your rent, or your electricity, or your internet access. By freezing your debit card, you are going to intentionally cause every single automated subscription tied to that card to fail. That is exactly what we want to happen. The gyms, the streaming services, the software tools, and the random Patreon subscriptions will all suddenly bounce. You will start receiving dozens of urgent emails warning you that your payment method needs to be updated. Do not panic when you see those emails. Those failed payments are the exact sound of your money staying safely inside your bank account where it belongs. You have successfully stopped the invisible bleeding without having to navigate a single impossible cancellation menu or wait on hold. With a customer service representative, you have aggressively seized control of the automated extraction machine and shut off the power. Of course, you still have to pay for your fundamental survival. But instead of letting the corporations reach into your account and blindly take what they want, you are going to reverse the dynamic. You are going to intentionally log into your utility portal and manually authorize the exact payment for your electricity. You will manually authorize the exact payment for your rent. You transition from being a passive victim of an automated system to becoming the active dictator of your remaining cash. This process of manual authorization completely changes your psychological relationship with your money. When you have to actively push the money out of your account instead of passively letting it be pulled, you regain a profound sense of agency. The intense anxiety and decision fatigue we talked about earlier starts to quietly dissipate. You stop fearing your bank account because you suddenly know with absolute certainty that nothing can leave that account without your direct physical permission. Once you have successfully stopped the bleeding with the hard pause, you are ready for phase 2 of the financial triage system. I call this the Runway Extension Protocol. Now that you are no longer passively losing cash to the automated subscription machine, you are left staring at a finite pool of remaining money. The biggest psychological trap you will face right now is keeping all of that remaining money sitting in your primary checking account. Staring at your total available net worth every single time you buy groceries is a recipe for absolute mental disaster. The danger lies in what behavioral economists call the big pile illusion. When you look at a lump sum of $5,000 or $10,000 sitting in a single account, your brain genuinely struggles to comprehend the reality of its depletion. On a Tuesday morning, that pile looks massive enough to justify a $20 takeout lunch, because $20 feels mathematically insignificant compared to $10,000. But on a Friday night, that exact same pile looks terrifyingly small when you suddenly remember your rent is due next week. Your emotional state wildly fluctuates based on the context of the moment. Think about it like being stranded on a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean. If you take all of the emergency food and water and pile it directly in the center of the boat, human nature guarantees that the crew will consume it entirely too fast. The visual abundance of the pile tricks the mind into feeling secure. To survive a long journey, you absolutely must break the big pile down into strictly measured daily rations, and you must physically lock away the rest. You have to save yourself from your own natural impulses. The Runway Extension Protocol requires you to intentionally hide your own money from yourself. You are going to take the entire lump sum of your remaining cash and move it completely out of your daily field of vision. You are not going to leave it in a linked savings account at your current bank, because swiping between accounts on the same app offers zero structural friction. In a moment of panic or weakness, you could instantly transfer the money back in 3 seconds. That defeats the entire purpose. Instead, you are going to open a completely free high-yield savings account at an entirely different banking institution. It needs to be a bank you have absolutely no prior relationship with. You want to choose an institution that operates strictly online and does not have physical branches in your city. The goal is to deliberately construct a fortress around your money that is inherently slow and wonderfully frustrating to access. You are building a moat between your daily anxiety and your total survival capital. Once that remote account is open, you are going to transfer every single dollar of your remaining emergency funds into it. You will leave your primary checking account almost completely empty. Once the transfer clears, you are going to log out of the new banking website, and you are absolutely not going to download their mobile app onto your phone. You want to make checking that total balance an annoying multi-step process that requires sitting down at a computer and remembering a complex password. Now you have to calculate your strict survival burn rate. You look at the manual bills you authorized in Phase 1, like rent and electricity, and you add a highly realistic number for basic groceries. You do not include any padding for fun or entertainment because you are in triage mode. You divide that total monthly survival number in half. That specific number is the absolute minimum amount of oxygen you need to survive for 2 weeks. Here is the mechanical genius of the system. You are going to set up an automated transfer from your new remote fortress account back to your primary daily checking account to hit on the 1st and the 15th of every single month. You are essentially hiring yourself and paying yourself a strict survival salary. You are taking the terrifying unpredictability of unemployment and replacing it with a cold, calculated mechanical structure. The psychological relief this provides is absolutely massive. By systematically re-establishing a bi-weekly deposit, you successfully trick your exhausted brain out of the trauma of the stagnant pond. The river of money is suddenly flowing again, even if it is significantly smaller than before. When you wake up and look at your primary banking app, you no longer see a terrifying finite countdown. This protocol completely isolates the panic and removes daily willpower from the equation. If you want to spend extra money on a random Wednesday, your primary checking account will simply bounce because the funds are not there. If your brain tries to convince you to pull money out of the remote fortress bank, it will take 3 full business days for the automated clearinghouse transfer to process. That 3-day delay is your ultimate safety net, giving your rational brain more than enough time to cool down and actively veto the emotional urge. When you strip away the emotional weight of unemployment, you are left with a very simple and incredibly brutal mathematical equation. In the corporate world, startups talk endlessly about their financial runway. Your personal financial runway is simply the exact number of days you have left before your cash balance hits 0. When you have a job, your runway stretches out infinitely into the future. But the absolute second your income stops, your runway suddenly becomes a terrifyingly finite number. And the math behind how you manage that number is the single most important calculation of your life. Let us walk through a highly realistic example to see exactly how this math works in practice. Imagine you have exactly $8,000 sitting in your savings account on the day you lose your job. During your normal, comfortable life, your average monthly burn rate, including rent and food and all your various digital subscriptions, is roughly $4,000. If you do absolutely nothing to change your automated ecosystem, and you just let the machine keep running, you have exactly 2 months. You have 60 days until total financial collapse. 60 days might sound like a decent amount of time, but in the professional world, it is an absolute blink of an eye. In those 60 days, you have to process the trauma of the layoff, update your resume, navigate multiple rounds of slow corporate interviews, and wait for a hiring manager to finally make a decision. Watching that 60-day clock violently tick down in the background of your mind is enough to drive anyone into a state of complete panic. Every single day that passes feels like a heavy, physical weight pressing down on your chest. Now let us apply the financial triage system and look at the exact same $8,000. You execute the hard pause and you implement the Runway Extension Protocol. You ruthlessly sever the $200 in invisible, recurring subscriptions. You aggressively eliminate the $300 a month you were unconsciously spending on frictionless food delivery and convenience purchases. You cut your grocery bill down to strict survival basics, saving another $200. You are not just clipping coupons, you are systematically dismantling the automated extraction machine. Suddenly, your monthly burn rate drops from $4,000 down to $2,500. When you had a steady paycheck, saving $1,500 a month probably felt like a nice, but ultimately optional, financial goal. But when your income is absolute zero, that $1,500 is not just extra money. It is the literal oxygen that is going to keep your submarine alive. You have to stop viewing money as a currency used to buy things and start viewing it strictly as a currency used to buy time. Look at the new equation. You take your $8,000 survival fund and you divide it by your new optimized, the burn rate of $2,500. Your runway instantly jumps from a terrifying 2 months to over 3 full months. You have successfully extended your survival window from 60 days to nearly 100 days. By enduring the temporary friction of manually paying your bills and locking away your cash, you just legally manufactured an entire extra month of life out of thin air. You have to truly internalize the profound psychological power of that extra month. What does buying 40 extra days actually mean in the real world? It means you do not have to accept the very first insulting job offer that comes your way just because your electricity is about to be shut off. It means you have the breathing room to actually negotiate your starting salary without feeling completely backed into a corner. You have bought yourself the ultimate luxury in a capitalist society, which is the luxury of absolute patience. There is a hidden dynamic in the professional world that hiring managers rarely talk about out loud. They can subconsciously smell financial desperation on a candidate. When you are interviewing on day 55 of a 60-day runway, your anxiety heavily bleeds into your voice. You talk too fast and you agree to terms too quickly, and you project a complete lack of leverage. The company quietly knows they have you trapped, and your subsequent salary offer will absolutely reflect that inherent weakness. But when you interview on day 55 of a 100-day runway, your entire physical posture is completely different. You project a quiet, natural confidence because you know you have another month and a half of oxygen left in the tanks. You can politely decline a lowball offer because your remote fortress bank account gives you the structural support to walk away. That quiet, unbothered confidence is exactly what makes companies desperately want to hire you, and it is exactly what makes them offer you more money. This is the undeniable magic of the math. When you are unemployed, every single dollar you refuse to spend on a frictionless digital convenience exponentially compounds into your future professional leverage. You are trading minor everyday comforts for massive strategic power. When you finally land that new job with a better salary because you had the patience to negotiate, you will look back and realize that those canceled subscriptions literally paid for your new life. The math proves that cutting back is not a punishment, but a highly calculated investment in your own survival. Now, you might be thinking that this all sounds incredibly depressing and utterly exhausting. You just went through one of the most traumatic moments of your professional career. And now, you're being told to completely strip away every single small comfort you have left. It feels like adding an intentional layer of punishment on top of an already miserable situation. You are completely exhausted, and the idea of fighting with customer service menus and manually typing out 16-digit numbers feels like an impossible mountain to climb. It is entirely natural to feel this profound sense of resistance because cutting back feels like a massive step backwards. You probably worked incredibly hard for years to finally afford a lifestyle where you did not have to worry about a $10 streaming service or a $20 delivery fee. Giving those specific things up feels like you are verbally admitting defeat. It feels like you are waving a white flag and telling the world that you are officially broke. You have to understand that this feeling is completely normal because we heavily associate our daily spending habits with our fundamental personal identity. We live in a hyper-consumerist society where frictionless convenience is directly equated with being successful. When you suddenly have to manually authorize a payment or deliberately skip an online purchase, it physically hurts your pride. It feels like a devastating loss of personal status. But you have to aggressively separate your fragile ego from your absolute survival math. Implementing these extreme structural barriers is absolutely not a punishment for losing your job. You did not do anything wrong, and you do not deserve to be punished. These actions are highly tactical defensive maneuvers, designed to protect your future self. You are not stepping backward in life. You are simply crouching down behind a wall to avoid getting hit by flying debris. When a massive multinational corporation suddenly loses its primary source of revenue, the chief executive officer does not keep spending millions of dollars on luxury corporate retreats just to protect the company ego. They immediately freeze all non-essential hiring and aggressively slash operating costs to save the core business. You are the chief executive officer of your own life, and your primary revenue stream just violently dried up. You have to put your ego aside and act with that exact same ruthless corporate efficiency. To actually prove to yourself how much power you still possess, I want you to complete one hyper-specific micro action in the next 24 hours. I do not want you to open your digital banking app on your phone. The screen on your phone is entirely too small, and the digital numbers glowing on the glass do not feel physically real enough to break through your cognitive fatigue. Instead, I want you to physically print out the last 30 days of your primary checking account statement on actual paper. If you do not own a printer, you need to drive to a local library or a print shop. It is absolutely vital that this information exists in the real physical world. Once you have those pages, I want you to grab a bright yellow highlighter and sit down at a completely clear kitchen table in total silence. You are going to slowly drag that highlighter over every single line item transaction that you did not actively and consciously authorize in the moment. Every single automated subscription, every hidden convenience fee, and every frictionless digital purchase gets a bright yellow line. You are systematically pulling the invisible enemy out of the digital shadows and forcing it into the harsh physical light of day. When you finish scanning the pages, you are going to take a calculator and add up the total dollar amount of all that yellow ink. Seeing that final physical number written down on a piece of paper will completely shock your system. It will instantly convert your vague, suffocating anxiety into a highly specific and highly actionable target. You will suddenly realize exactly how much oxygen the automated machine is stealing from your submarine every single month. Once you have that final number, you are going to pick just one single yellow 2-line on that paper. Choose just one automated charge that is quietly bleeding your accounts dry. And within that exact same 24-hour window, you are going to aggressively hunt down the cancellation process and completely destroy it by killing just one single parasite. Today, you will take your first definitive step from being a passive, paralyzed victim to becoming an active, ruthless defender of your own financial runway. Look, here's the truth. When you have a comfortable salary depositing into your account every 2 weeks, your relationship with money is entirely fundamentally flawed. You view your bank balance as a tool for acquiring social status and buying temporary convenience. You trade the hours of your life for cash, and then you immediately trade that cash for things that signal to the world that you're doing fine. But the sudden violent shock of losing your job completely shatters that illusion. You instantly realize that money was never actually meant to be a tool for consumption. It's a strictly defensive tactical weapon designed to protect you from chaos. This period of unemployment is going to force you through a very close, painful, but incredibly necessary psychological reset. It's going to strip away all the fake layers of your identity that were tied to what you could buy. When you're sitting in the quiet of your home, auditing your expenses, with a yellow highlighter, you're undergoing a massive ego death. The version of you that needed expensive takeout to feel successful is being completely dismantled. And what replaces it is something infinitely more powerful. You begin to see the modern financial world with perfect high-definition clarity. You realize that the entire system is built on a very fragile illusion of permanent paper wealth. Society wants you to believe that as long as you've got good credit and a decent job title, you're invincible. But true wealth has absolutely nothing to do with paper promises or digital borrowing power. True wealth is your tangible ability to survive a massive systemic shock without losing your mind. True wealth is the raw physical reality of having enough oxygen in the tank to weather the storm. We talked earlier about how losing your income destroys your trust in the future. But you must understand that personal financial trust isn't an emotional state. It's a structural necessity. You can't rebuild your confidence by simply looking in the mirror and hoping for the best. You only rebuild trust by fundamentally changing the architecture of your life, by creating artificial friction and locking your capital inside a remote fortress bank. You're actively engineering a structure that you can entirely depend on when your emotions are entirely chaotic. This structural system creates a profound shift in your personal sovereignty. When you allow automated corporations to pull money from your account whenever they want, you're sacrificing your independence. You're letting algorithms dictate your survival. But when you execute the hard pause and manually control every single dollar that leaves your hands, you become the absolute sovereign ruler of your own economy. You aren't a passenger in the system anymore. You're the dictator of your own runway. Eventually, this deeply painful period of unemployment will come to an end. You'll go through the interviews and you'll negotiate a better salary because you bought to yourself the luxury of time. The income machine will finally turn back on and the direct deposits will start flowing into your checking account once again. The natural human urge will be to immediately celebrate and return to your old frictionless ways. The temptation to link all your cards and subscribe to all the services will be incredibly strong. But you mustn't ever go back to the way things were before the crash. You've survived the deep-sea submarine experience, and you now know the exact true value of a single breath of oxygen. You know precisely how fast the ship can sink when the clogged engines fail. You must carry this strict survival architecture forward into your new prosperous life. You keep the remote fortress bank account open. You maintain the artificial friction for all online purchases. You intentionally keep the big pile of money hidden from your own daily view. If you maintain this mechanical system, when you're making good money, you'll build wealth at a completely unprecedented speed. The defensive weapons you forged in your darkest moment of panic will become the exact tools that eventually buy your permanent financial freedom. You'll stop buying things you don't need, and you'll start aggressively buying back the remaining decades of your life. You won't ever have to fear a sterile 4-minute corporate Zoom call ever again, because your structural foundation will be absolutely unbreakable. I want you to think about that yellow highlighter exercise we just discussed. When you finally sit down and physically print out your bank statements, what is 9? The single most embarrassing or frustrating automated charge you know you're going to find hiding in those pages. Leave a comment below and tell me exactly what invisible subscription you're going to destroy today.